Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good morning. I'm Evan Smith, and these are your news headlines to 12. The chief of Williams Lake First Nation in central BC has a message for anyone questioning the legitimacy of investigations into suspected unmarked graves around the former residential school near his community. Chief Willie Sellers says the investigations are about bringing the truth to light, and the probe at the former Catholic-run St. Joseph's Mission has uncovered overwhelming evidence of horror and suffering. And he says that evidence is being carefully compiled in an orderly and scientific way. Sellers' remarks came as the lead investigator in the search at St. Joseph's announced the second phase of their work has identified 66 more reflections, adding to the initial 93 potential graves already detected. Now, layoffs and hiring freezes have been prevalent in the tech industry, causing concern for students graduating in that area. Reporter Maham Hashmi looks into how valid that concern really is.
The BCIT Student Association hosted their annual career fair for tech and business students, where multiple recruiters shared how they were eager for new hires. Major companies such as Amazon have laid off large numbers of employees in software engineering this month. However, many smaller companies on the rise are a source of hope for students worried about getting hired. Kelly Osborne from the BCIT CST program shared her optimistic outlook at the career fair.
There's a news cycle talking about what's going on with big companies, but there's a lot of mid and smaller companies out there too, so you never know where you'll find your niche.
Many layoffs in the industry have been a result of overhiring that was done post-pandemic, as well as the economic state of the country. Maham Hashmi, 1680 The Crow.
We are now joined by reporter Maham Hashmi. Maham, what is causing smaller companies to expand and hire more students? Thank you, Maham. And do BCI Tech students have a better chance of working for these companies? Thank you, Mom. Environment Canada has issued special weather statements for most of BC, saying Arctic air will begin to invade the province starting Friday night. The Weather Office says temperatures will be 5 to 10 degrees below seasonal across the south coast, marking a major shift in a month that's so far been mild. Meanwhile, Environment Canada says the mercury will drop 10 to 20 degrees below the usual for this time of year in central BC, as well as the southern interior. It says gusty winds will accompany the cold air, and while temperatures are expected to rise late next week, the timing is uncertain. A Fraser Valley masseur has pleaded guilty to 6 counts of sexual assault, with some counts involving more than one complaint. The BC Prosecution Service confirms the man who operated a business called Bud's Massage Therapy entered the plea earlier this week. Police in Abbotsford announced the charges in 2020 after 3 women reported they were assaulted while receiving treatment there. The College of Massage Therapists of British Columbia says the man has never been a registered member. Now, the company that is building a natural gas pipeline across northern British Columbia has been fined for a 3rd time as a result of failure to comply with the requirements of its environmental assessment certificate. The BC government issued a bulletin saying Coastal GasLink has been fined $213,600 for continued deficiencies with erosion sediment control measures. The bulletin issued Wednesday says reoccurring issues with erosion and sediment control have resulted in ongoing compliance and enforcement action, though more recent inspections have shown improvement. The Environmental Assessment Office says more than 50 inspections have been done along the pipeline construction route since the project started in 2019, resulting in 37 warnings and 2 other financial penalties imposed last year, $72,500 in February and $170,100 in May. The office says it entered into a compliance agreement with Coastal GasLink last July that takes a more proactive approach to erosion for about 100 kilometers of the 670-kilometer pipeline route where ground had yet to be broken. The pipeline, which is in its final scheduled year of construction, is to connect natural gas facilities in northeastern BC to the LNG Canada terminal in Kitimat on the northern coast. Now, in national news, Canada will send 4 Leopard battle tanks to Ukraine, as announced by Anita Anand, Canada's defense minister. The commitment was made on Thursday after speculation as to whether or not Canada would ship over the tanks. Anand went on to state that Ottawa is also providing trainers, spare parts, as well as ammunition. The 4 Leopards are part of the 112 that are currently owned by the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, Ontario's top doctor says the worst of the triple viral threats of the flu, RSV, and COVID-19 is over, but COVID activity may pick up again due to the more transmissible XBB 1.5 variant. Chief Medical Officer of Health Dr. Kieran Moore says while viral activity is declining, there may be a smaller spring wave.
The difficulty, though, is predicting the impact of XBB. We know it's more transmissible. The data is showing internationally that there's no signal for increased severity, but we have a significant wall of immunity that we've built across Ontario.
A new report says misinformation about COVID-19 contributed to more than 2,800 Canadian deaths and at least $300 million in hospital and ICU visits.
The Council of Canadian Academies, a not-for-profit, says misinformation led to people not believing COVID-19 was real or thinking it was exaggerated. The report estimates the resulting vaccine hesitancy affected more than 2.35 million Canadians between March and November of 2021. It says if those people hadn't delayed or refused vaccination, deaths and hospitalizations could have been avoided. Lisa Laporte, The Canadian Press.
Now, in the United States, the FBI has seized the website of a prolific ransomware gang that has heavily targeted hospitals and other healthcare providers.
Ransomware gang The Hive targeted in a cyber crackdown. The Justice Department, the FBI, and international law enforcement partners seizing its website and dismantling much of its digital infrastructure. The FBI says the digital gang has collected some $100 million in ransom payments from over 1,300 companies worldwide. The Hive website now displaying a note in both English and Russian saying it's been seized by the FBI. Dave Packer, ABC News.
The Boeing company will be arraigned in court today over 2 crashes of Boeing 737 MAX jets. Lawyers for the families accuse Boeing of committing the deadliest corporate crime in the United States' history. Chicago attorney Robert Clifford, who represents victims' families, says the tragedy affects everyone in the same way.
This could have happened to anyone. The grief and the sorrow and the depth of loss that's experienced in the U.S. is just the same as someone from Africa and the U.K.
Now, staying in the States, farm worker Chun-Li Zhao, accused of killing 7 people in back-to-back shootings at 2 Northern California mushroom farms, is charged with 7 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. ABC's Matt Rivers reports from Half Moon Bay in California.
The victims have all been identified ranging in age from age 43 to age 73, and if convicted, Zhao could face life in prison without parole or even the death penalty.
Now, Russian forces have unleashed a new barrage of missiles and self-exploding drones in nearly a dozen parts of the Ukraine.
The strikes caused the first attack-related death of the year in Kiev and killed over 10 people in all. Ukraine's emergency services said over 10 people were wounded as well. Officials in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia province said several people were killed and many others injured in a strike on an energy facility. The self-exploding drones swept in overnight before the missile strikes. Ukrainian military authorities believe the attacks were a Russian attempt to overwhelm or distract Ukraine's air defenses. I'm Karen Chamas.
Now, the black boxes recovered from the January 15th plane crash in Nepal are being sent to Singapore for analysis.
Experts at Singapore's Transportation Safety Investigation Bureau will examine the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder to try to identify the cause of the crash that killed all 72 people on board. A committee formed by the government is still looking into the cause of the Yeti airline.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm Evan Smith, and we will be right back with your sports headlines.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Teresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
This is sports on 1680 The Crow.
And we're back with your sports headlines. The Vancouver Canucks suffered their first loss under new head coach Rick Tocchet. The Canucks were decimated by the Seattle Kraken with the scoreline ending at 6-1 for Seattle. Connor Garland was the lone goal scorer for Vancouver in the game. Vancouver next plays on Friday against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, Canadian linebacker Bo Lacombe is remaining with the BC Lions. Lacombe signed a 2-year extension with BC on Thursday. He was slated to become a free agent on February 14th. Lacombe is now entering his 8th CFL season and 7th with BC. Last year, he had 52 tackles, 42 defense, and 10 being special teams, 2 sacks, and 1 pass knockdown in 13 regular season games. The 6'2", 225-pound Lacombe was the CFL's top Canadian in 2021. A Wimbledon champion will face a juggernaut seeking her first Grand Slam title at the Australian Open Women's Final.
Reigning Wimbledon champion Elena Rybakina has beaten two-time former champion Victoria Azarenka to move into her first Australian Open Women's Final and her second Grand Slam finale. The 23-year-old closed out a 7-6, 6-3 win in an hour and 41 minutes, her big first serve and powerful ground strokes in the end proving too much for the 33-year-old Azarenka. Her reward is a title showdown with the 5th-seed Arina Sabalenka, who played aggressively to end the surprising run of the unseeded 30-year-old Magda Linette, her 7-6, 6-2 win, securing her a first major final. I'm Graham Agars.
Now in soccer news, a dummy of Real Madrid forward Vinicius Jr. has been hanged from a highway bridge hours before the team's match against Atletico Madrid in the Copa del Rey. The perpetrators used a black figure with Vinicius Jr.'s name on it, tied a rope around its neck, and hanged it from an overpass in Madrid, along with a banner with the words, "Madrid hates Real." The banner and the figure apparently were attached to the bridge while still dark early in the morning. The message on the banner is often used by one of Atletico Madrid's ultra fans groups. Vinicius is black and has been subjected to racist taunts more than once in Spain. Now in basketball news, Jordan Poole made the winning layup with a second remaining to cap a crazy back-and-forth final minute, and the Golden State Warriors fought back to beat the Memphis Grizzlies 122-120. Grizzlies center Brandon Clark says the Warriors are a solid team.
They're a really good team. Playing here is tough, but we do take it personal. We lost in the playoffs last year, so we definitely wanted to win, but we're still gonna play them twice at our crib.
Now switching to football news, the New York Jets have hired former Denver Broncos coach Nathaniel Hackett as their new offensive coordinator. The team announced the hiring Thursday of the 43-year-old Hackett, who replaces Mike LaFleur. Hackett went 4-11 in less than one season as head coach of the Broncos. Hackett's arrival will fuel some speculation about whether the Jets could pursue quarterback Aaron Rodgers, whose playing future is uncertain. Hackett served as the Packers' offensive coordinator from 2019 to 2021 with Rodgers under center. The Jets also announced that Keith Carter was hired as the team's offensive line coach / run game coordinator. Thank you for listening. I'm Evan Smith, and this was 1680, The Crow.
Now it's time for the comment.
Hi, I'm producer Riley Lyons, here for your 1680 The Crow comment. I'm going to be talking about Tesla and their long and slow descent from the front page of the car world, and why Tesla just doesn't have that same level of hype that it used to. Tesla has always been a company that really thrives off of its own clout and reputation. They're known as this tech company with their celebrity CEO, Elon Musk, that stepped into the car industry and dominated the competition in electric vehicles. The perception around EVs changed when Tesla started making their cars super quick and uniquely styled. The vehicles that often came to mind when talking about electric car options were things like the Prius, which had a reputation for being ugly and weak and only being purchased by people who were drawn to its great fuel mileage and didn't really care about what the car looked like. Tesla showed larger car companies that you can make a fuel-efficient or fully electric car cool. But the Cybertruck was announced 3 years ago, and its original release date, set for late 2022, was pushed back. And the Tesla Roadster was announced in 2017 and was supposed to be released in 2020. It's 2023 now, and there are no Roadsters or Cybertrucks on the road. Competitors were left leaps and bounds behind Tesla, but it's been years, and car companies are finally releasing cars that boast similar, if not better, specifications for similar price points. So this lack of hype around the brand, paired with Elon Musk's recent controversies with Twitter, put Tesla in a pretty muddy situation. Unless they can make some large impressive announcements showing off advancements in their cars, they'll slowly start to succumb to all the companies that they were laughing at back in their heyday. This is your comment. I'm Riley Lyons for 1680 The Crow.
It's extremely important for people to stay healthy and to stay active as much as possible.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Hello, podcast people, and welcome to another episode of The Crow Chronicles. I'm Kevin Pontius with my co-host Joseph Augusti. Joseph, what's our topic today?
Our topic today is the relocation of the Vancouver Grizzlies. We are going to dissect what went wrong on the court and off. Kevin, you're an older guy. Do you remember the Grizzlies at all?
First of all, older guy. I mean, I'm still in my 20s here, Joseph. Come on. But no, honestly, I have very few memories of the Grizzlies as a team, and before doing research for this podcast, I really had no idea what happened. Do you have any memories of this team?
I wasn't actually alive. Well, I was, technically, but I was 6 months old when the Grizzlies relocated. And looking back, it just seems ridiculous. The poor drafting, the poor GM, Stu Jackson, who was recommended by NBA Commissioner David Stern, he didn't work out. You look at the Raptors, who got Vince Carter and other high-flying stars, and we're stuck with Bryant Reeves. It just seems ridiculous to me.
I 100% agree. It is completely absurd. But let's take a step back and go through the drafting.
So, one of the main issues playing a role in the Grizzlies being a terrible team was the player drafting. Now, the Grizzlies, along with the Raptors, being an expansion team in '95, were not allowed to get the first pick in the draft for the first 4 seasons. This seems ridiculous, but after the Orlando Magic drafted Shaquille O'Neal in 1992, one of the league's newest expansion teams would make it in the playoffs in his second season, and eventually all the way to the finals in his third season.
But don't just take it from us. Let's check in with someone who was actually there. Here's Vancouver Grizzlies PA announcer Al Murdoch.
What they looked at, basically they called it like the Shaq, Penny Hardaway rule, because, Orlando didn't have anything, and then all of a sudden, boom, boom, they got Shaq and they got Penny.
Right.
So that being said, there was I think a good reason for the NBA to decide, well, we can't have teams tanking just so they can get the first overall pick, and so that's why they brought it in.
And that makes total sense. But take a look at this stat, Joseph. The Grizzlies won their first 2 games before losing 19 straight. This wasn't even the worst losing streak of that season. They later would lose an astounding 23 games in a row, which ranks 5th worst all-time in NBA history. So basically, the expansion restrictions severely hampered their ability to build a competitive team. So when you hear about the Orlando Magic having success after drafting Shaquille O'Neal and then them changing the draft rules for the Canadian expansion, do you think it's fair because of that, because they had so much success in Orlando?
I actually don't, Kevin. Well, you realize that it wasn't like the Magic spawned with the first overall pick. They earned it. They were bad. How do you expect teams to get better if they're not drafting high? The Grizzlies, of course, because in the expansion draft, you're only taking players that other teams don't want. It's really, really hard to be a good team just building out of the expansion draft. Every good team in the history has had high draft picks, pretty much. So if you're not getting high draft picks, how do you expect them to get better? What a ridiculous process. I don't think for a second that if it was 2 American teams, it would have had the same situation. But that's just me with my tinfoil hat.
That's an interesting take. I asked TSN legend and Grizzlies sideline reporter Rod Black the same question. Rod, take it away.
I think they learned a lot from last time. I don't think they will let that happen. No, and I honestly, again, it's easy to go the anti-Canadian route on that and say, oh no, never happened in the States. I just think they did it. They did it last time because they were all afraid of the competitive inequities, and because also the NBA's rosters are only like 15 players deep, right? So yet there are tons of players. I just think at that time they didn't want an expansion team to do well. All the owners, they kind of voted it, and David of course worked for the owners, right? So yeah, it won't happen again, but I don't think it's because they're American. I just think it's because they learned from last time.
Now, Kevin, one of the most underrated aspects, in my opinion, of the Grizzlies' demise was the poor Canadian dollar. Even back then, it was in the high 60 cents and low 70 cents. That's not good when you're paying your players in American dollars. Former Grizzlies intercom announcer Al Murdoch speaks to this and its impact.
Well, I think there were various reasons why the Grizzlies left town. I think one of the biggest ones was that, for sure. I mean, when you've got a dollar that's below 70 cents to the American dollar, and you're paying all your players, you're paying some of the management team in American dollars, and you're only taking in Canadian revenue, and then you have kind of the start and the record that our team had over the 6 years that they were here.
So obviously the Canadian dollar, taxes, and other financial incentives hurt the team, but it's impossible to forget about general manager Stu Jackson's draft blunders. Back to Rod.
I like Stu Jackson, but I just don't think he was, I don't think they built a team properly then. I really don't. Yeah. And from the day they drafted Big Country Reeves, I love the guy. Nice guy. And having said that, like years later, does it really matter? But, you want to sell the game, and they didn't really have to at the time because they were getting fans anyway. But if you want to sell the game, you got to go for this. Again, yeah, sure. Look who was in the draft that year.
Look who was in the draft that year, and the years beyond. Now, I know this is revisionist history, but the Grizzlies' poor scouting is one of the most soul-crushing things for a Vancouver sports fan to reflect on. Joseph, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely, Kevin. So, the Grizzlies took, with their top 10 picks in their first couple of years, Bryant Reeves, Sharif Abdur-Rahim, Steve Francis, and Mike Bibby. Here are some of the players they could have taken. First, Kobe Bryant. Second, Steve Nash. Third, Kevin Garnett. 4, Dirk Nowitzki. 5, Vince Carter. And 6, Paul Pierce. Those are 6 Hall of Famers. I know Vince technically isn't in yet, but he will. Just think of how different the trajectory of the team would have been had they had a competent scouting staff from the very beginning. But forget the players. That's living in the past. Stu Jackson never should have got the job in the first place.
So do you think the only reason Stu Jackson got his job is because of nepotism?
Not necessarily, because they're not well related. It was just a bad recommendation. That happens all the time in every workplace on earth. No one's well, I am blaming David Stern. I mean, it's nothing personal, but this was David Stern's fault at the end for handing the Grizzlies a poor executive. You look at all the teams, everyone's got a Phil Jackson or a Jerry Krause or a Rob Pelinka, if you want to go that far, or a Masai Ujiri, to use a certain term. But it all starts up top. If the chicken is bad, so are the eggs.
Never heard that one.
I just made it up.
The chicken is, I'm using that for sure.
Right. And we're back. Sorry about that. Let's throw back to Rod to finish up the ownership and David Stern narrative.
Right.
And, to this day, I would argue, and God rest his soul, I love David Stern. He was a man with great vision, and he wanted it to work. He wanted it to work in Canada. He wanted Vancouver to remain, but it just wasn't going to do it. And one thing they do is, if it's not working right away, they pull.
Right.
So they pulled, and they brought that ownership to Memphis, which they had a strong group. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there are no Grizzlies in Memphis.
Before we get to our final point, Rod's right. There's no Grizzlies in Memphis. Joseph, do you think Memphis should have changed their name?
Absolutely, Kevin. There are no Grizzlies in Memphis. It just doesn't make sense. But on a more tangible level, the Memphis franchise should have just completely broken from the Vancouver franchise. The Vancouver franchise had no success whatsoever. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to continue with what is, in my opinion, a losing culture.
Fair enough. So we've touched on the horrendous expansion draft restrictions, the lack of players wanting to play north of the border, ownership, and poor draft selections. Joseph, did we miss anything?
Kevin, there's one more thing we haven't touched upon, and that is the selection of Steve Francis.
With the second pick in the 1999 NBA draft, the Vancouver Grizzlies select Steve Francis from the University of Maryland.
Steve Francis was a high-level point guard coming out of college. That's good. The problem was the Grizzlies already had previously selected Mike Bibby second overall. So now with the Grizzlies having the second overall pick yet again, they decided to take Steve Francis. Not a problem, right? You normally want to go best player available. The problem was Steve Francis had already stated publicly that he did not want to play for Vancouver under any circumstances. He wanted to play for his hometown Chicago Bulls. But the Grizzlies selected him anyway. So the key was, can they convince him to stay there? The answer actually was yes. So Steve Francis decided that he was going to give it a go in Vancouver. He visited the city and he went, to the Vancouver airport, YVR. But that's where things started to go south. A woman saw Steve Francis and his friends and assumed that they were a part of a rap group. That was it for Steve Francis. He never went into Vancouver again as a player. He refused to play there, and the Grizzlies had to deal him from a position of weakness. So they traded him away, and that was a wasted draft pick. There was plenty of other players they could have taken, but that is a self-inflicted wound by a team that could not afford a failure at the draft day table. Getting beyond him not wanting to play there, they shouldn't have taken him because they already had Mike Bibby. Steve Francis, in my opinion, is the definition of all that went wrong in Vancouver. Poor drafting, player reluctance, and short-sighted thinking overall.
So that pretty much sums it up. Now before we wrap it up, let's get two different perspectives on the future of Vancouver basketball. First, here's Al Murdoch.
And again, first off, the NBA is not interested in expansion right now.
Yes.
And I can't imagine that they would be interested in expansion, at least another 5 years, maybe longer. They took a shot at Vancouver before. As David Stern, the late David Stern, the ex-commissioner, would say, it's one of the biggest disappointments as being the commissioner is having Vancouver fail. But that being said, you need somebody with $1 billion to be able to get a new team.
Oh yeah.
So again, $1 billion, and you're in Canada, and again, our dollar is hovering around 72, 73 right now.
Yes.
there was a time over the last decade or so where it was maybe not a decade, but where it was at par. But I don't know if we'll ever see those times again. So you've got to have a guy with massively deep pockets, or an organization or a group of people with deep pockets to be able to even have a shot at even getting a franchise, let alone trying to make it successful in Canada. So if you're asking me whether or not we're going to get another team in my lifetime, I highly doubt it.
Well, that's kind of depressing. But thank you anyways, Al. Rod Black has a different point of view. Take it away, Rod.
By the way, I still believe that Vancouver could get an NBA franchise. Market's still there. You just need those days of ownership. Look at the owners of the Raptors at the time, the Slates and the Bitovs. I mean, you had to be just a $100 millionaire, right? And you could own a team and have a piece, and it would be fun. You have to be a billionaire plus now.
Yeah.
Look at Eugene, again, the late Eugene Melnyk in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Why, they struggled as well. Eugene Melnyk wasn't a billionaire.
Right.
That's what it is. All of any singular ownership or ownership entities have got to be part of a large corporation.
So maybe one day, if someone has deep enough pockets, Vancouver basketball will return once again. For Kevin Pontius, I'm Joseph Augusti. Be sure to check out the other episodes of the Crow Chronicles, as well as our social media, at BCIT Journalism on Twitter, and at BCIT News for Facebook and Instagram. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a great day.